AWS Loft Talks.
My name's Scott Ford. I work for the company Chef. So I'm here tonight to talk to you guys about the exciting topic of compliance and auditing. That's the sound of my pyrotechnics. In compliance and auditing, it's awful, right? Our teams are getting smaller, but the infrastructure that we're managing is getting bigger, as you can see here. And with that is all kinds of complexity that goes along. Anytime you make a single change, our infrastructures, they're not standalone instances. These have topologies. The way that you can make a single change in your infrastructure could affect all kinds of other systems out there. And the ability to track in those changes and ensure that your infrastructure is always compliant is getting to be incredibly difficult. With this, you know, we're all trying to move faster. We're all trying to increase the quality of the infrastructure and applications that we release. We need to have this type of visibility into it. We need to know who's making what changes when. We need to understand the security, and we also need to understand auditing, the ability to prove it at any point. Here's a bunch of regulatory frameworks. I don't pretend to be an expert in any of them. I've been through plenty of audits myself. It's a total nightmare. But one thing that I do know about all these things is they are not static, right? They're changing all the time. And so this model of being able, you know, going through an audit process that you have to do it at, you know, a snapshot of time, and you're going to be audited. You have to be able to move at the same speed at which the changes are coming out to these regulatory compliance frameworks. So whether or not these things matter to you or not, or you have security requirements that you need to meet in your infrastructure, you also need to ensure all the time that you are able to be compliant along with these various frameworks. So there's this conflict, right, between compliance and velocity. The thing is that we're trying to do is we're trying to continually prove, are we in compliance? And at the same time, we don't want to increase the drag that we have in the infrastructure and applications that we're releasing. So we need to both always be in a state that we can prove our security and our auditability for the infrastructure and applications, but at the same time increase the velocity at which we can release our infrastructure and applications. So with the compliance challenge, can you prove it? It breaks down like this. Things like access, process and workflow, technical debt, auditability. So the access. Do the right people have access to the systems? The process and workflow, were those systems accessed in the correct way that is by design of our either whatever frameworks we have to adhere to or by the organization we work for? The technical debt, if we have systems out there that are on old legacy versions of software, do we know about that? What types of, how does that affect the systems that we're releasing? And then auditability, at any point, can you actually prove that what's happening in your infrastructure and applications is in line with the policies that you have in place? The velocity challenge, can you reduce the drag, right? You need to be able to manage all these detailed requirements, the things that are coming in from outside frameworks or they're coming from your security organizations. You need to interpret these things, which are, I mean, if you've ever looked at any of these PCI or the Sarbanes-Oxley or Dodd-Frank, forget it. Like, it's a total nightmare. So, but can you interpret these requirements and then be able to go back and forth and make the changes to ensure you're in the correct state? And then you also, of course, as these requirements change, outside requirements change, can you react to them and stay compliant, stay within policy? So this is what it looks like, right? When we look at the compliance cycle, oftentimes, you know, historically what it's been is like you find out from somebody, a business unit, from a manager or a director, that you're going to be audited, and everybody runs around with their hair on fire, and it's this awful manual process of, you know, trying to prove at that moment in time that you are that you're in compliance. So a regulatory authority comes in, they tell the business unit tells the operations and development teams what the challenge is here for the audit, what we need to prove, and then you get this feedback cycle going. So the business units, the operations development teams, they're asking the executives, is this what you mean? Is this what you mean? The executives are going back to the auditors and they're saying, is this what you mean? And it's an awful cycle that nobody really understands what's going on. So reconciling is, how do we make this happen now with this new way that all of us are trying to operate? Infrastructure and applications designed as code, testable. We want to both prove it, we both want to reduce the drag. The solution here is something that most of us, hopefully in this room, that we're doing as we're designing this new infrastructure in place like Amazon, that we want to be able to continually analyze it. We want to determine the state, understand the state that we're trying to get to with our infrastructure and applications. We want to be able to specify it in some kind of a language, a framework. We want to be able to test it. Untested compliance is a complete illusion. You have to continually be testing it. And then, of course, you need to certify it, which is review it and sign off at the end. This is what we're trying to do. This is something that Chef is very interested in, which is this movement around compliance at velocity. So when you talk about analyzing it, be clear about the system. Be clear about what the state is of your infrastructure and applications, your security requirements, the services that are running on there. It turns out that with this, those that are using configuration management out there, whether it be a Chef or another tool out there, that this is a great way to do so. You have a language that describes your infrastructure in the state that it's in, or your applications that in the state that they're in. Example here, like we've got, we want to ensure across our infrastructure that the telnet server is not on any of our servers, and that the service is not enabled and it's not started at any point. On the flip side of that, we want to test that, because it's not enough anymore to just say that I can write the policy and that's good enough. Well, can you prove it? Infrastructure is no different than any of the other software that you're developing out there. You can write tests around your infrastructure, and with Chef, we're built on the language Ruby, and we have a testing framework called ServerSpec. ServerSpec is a great place for writing tests around your infrastructure. So we can say it, an example right here, we have the configuration, but we can also prove it by writing tests that run in our infrastructure that tests that nothing is listening on port 23, which the telnet server runs in. That runs in our infrastructure. We get feedback about that, and we know that if anybody makes changes out in our infrastructure that affects this policy, we're going to get feedback about that. We have our own rules engine built into Chef, so you can be notified about that, whether it's Slack or HipChat or some other web API or an email address. So test your infrastructure and applications continuously to ensure that they're always compliant. The certification process is a whole separate manual process, right, that you can't substitute for that. But what we're finding now is that with configuration management, this process is getting a lot easier. Auditors are actually accepting this configuration management and tests as a substitute for the manual process of creating Excel spreadsheets, which is what is typically done. When we think about the whole DevOps movement, one of the biggest elements that cannot be overlooked is the human aspect of this, which is involving people and having communication around things. So the changing role here of the compliance officer is that if you're out and you're developing infrastructure and applications, and you actually care about security, or you have outside auditing frameworks that you have to adhere to, you want to involve your compliance officer from the beginning. This old model of having it be a reactive engagement where you're checking things by hand, and it's a very short-sighted process, can be changed now in this same DevOps movement, where you involve people from the beginning. You test it, you test the code, and you're continuously updating your code in test as your infrastructure and applications change. This right here is key. So building consensus and bringing everybody in and keeping everybody involved. At this point, thank you very much.
AWS Loft Talks.